Welcome to the Arcology, a Shadowcasters network show about all things Shadowrun. I'm Mr. Johnson, and today we'll be talking about Astral Ways. Now for the news. In Shadowrun news, there is a Shadowrun 5th Edition Mega Bundle on Humble Bundle right now that you might want to check out if you don't have all the PDFs for it yet. You can get 17 5th Edition PDFs for only $18. That includes the 5th edition core rulebook, Run and Gun, Street Grimoire, Run Faster, Chrome Flesh, Data Trails, Rigor 5, Howling Shadows, Forbidden Arcana, Street Lethal, Kill Code, Dark Terrors, Stolen Souls, Market Panic, The Complete Trog, the Seattle Sprawl Digital Box Set, and Serrated Edge. $10 gets you 7 of those, and if you just got $1 to pitch in, it gets you the Seattle Sprawl Digital Box Set and Serrated Edge. Little trivia about the Seattle Sprawl Digital Box Set is that is Vox's writing debut as a Shadowrun author. A bunch of the location write-ups are the first sort of dipping of her toes into writing for Shadowrun. This Humble Bundle supports the Global Food Banking Network, and I'll just read off what they posted there for who they are. Their mission is to nourish the world's hungry through uniting and advancing food banks. GFN unites and empowers organizations that support those in need by reducing food waste and cultivating sustainable relationships that save lives. So you can support that cause and get your hands on a bunch of Shadowrun 5th Edition PDFs, many of which have content that is definitely still relevant in whatever edition you play. So definitely worth checking out. I want to make sure I mention that before it goes away. I'm not sure how long it's going for, so go check that out at humblebundle.com. The only other bit of Shadowrun news is that I can tell you that Hollow Streets is imminent. I don't have an exact date for when it goes live, but it's going to be very soon. And Hollow Streets is going to be an option for third-party Shadowrun content, sort of like the DM's Guild for D&D. So we should see lots of fun new Shadowrun content come out for that. I got some ideas for some stuff myself that I'll probably be putting out there pretty soon. In other news relating to not specifically Shadowrun, but Shadowrun adjacent things, Exit Vector is coming to Kickstarter March 28th. Exit Vector is an aerial combat board game set in a dystopian near future where nations, criminal syndicates, and powerful corporations compete for power in a high-tech world. Players assume the role of an expert pilot for hire, flying their high-performance aircraft on jobs ranging from search and destroy to troop transport. So very much inspired by rigors of Shadowrun. The Vault RPG Kickstarter campaign has ended. Final numbers on that is $29,301 of their $20,000 goal, which is good enough to hit 4 of their stretch goals. So congratulations to Team Rex Games. If you're curious about that game, check out the Vault Actual Play one-shot that we posted on the Arcology podcast feed. I personally backed the game, and I will definitely be playing some Vault in the future. It's a lot of fun. Hellslayers is a new RPG that I will be writing. Well, I have written basically for the most part. I'm sure there'll be some tweaks before it comes up. It's a hack and slash of Morkborg inspired by classic Doom and System Shock and other similar video games coming soon. Sort of a survival horror with some roguelike elements. We'll be doing an actual play soon that will go live next month, this upcoming April. And the Kickstarter page will be going up soon, so please follow it when it does. I'm looking forward to bringing this out to the world. I was inspired to write this when I read Morkborg and saw their very open third-party license. And I've just sort of been tweaking it a little bit here and there over the last couple of years, and I'm excited to see it come out. So we'll be bringing that to Kickstarter soon. And of course, the most important Kickstarter news is the Subversion Kickstarter by Fragging Unicorns Games. We are at $51,237 of the $10,000 goal, with 869 backers at the time of my reading this, with only 4 days to go to the end of the Kickstarter campaign. So, while $10,000 was the goal for Subversion to be made, we're well past that, so we're definitely seeing that game come out. $60,000 is actually the goal to put Fragging Unicorns Games in the best position. So that's sort of Opti's real goal that he's hoping for. So we're getting real close to that, and I'm really hoping that we hit it. just to make things go smoothly for Fragging Unicorns games. So please back if you haven't already, or spread the word if you can't back it or if you've already backed it. While it seems doubtful we'll hit the maximum stretch goal at 100K, it would be really awesome if we did. So again, go to Kickstarter.com or just search Subversion Kickstarter. That should bring it right up. All right, that's all I've got for the news. I guess, I was debating whether or not doing this, but I think I'm going to share some personal news. Our podcast posts have been a little bit irregular lately, and I've been kind of down lately because my mom passed away a little over a couple weeks ago. So I just thought I'd share that. I also had a birthday yesterday, which is on the fun side, and I want to show off this little guy that Vox got for me as one of my presents. It is the Spiffo plush. So if any of you are familiar with the Project Zomboid computer game, definitely one of my favorite video games of all time. This is sort of the mascot for that, and also potentially the source of the zombie outbreak. So I love how he's got a little Velcro spiked baseball bat he can hold in his hands. Anyway, so just thought I'd show that off. Anyway, let's move on to our main topic, Astral Ways, which is very recently come out. I think it was just under 3 weeks ago that it hit, PDF at least. So the big deal on this book, which I'm excited about, is that it is the first book in all of Shadowrun publishing that has provided details on the metaplanes with lots of rules and adventure hooks and suggestions for using them in a Shadowrun campaign. So previously, in every other edition, the metaplanes have been sort of misty and mysterious and alluded to here and there. We've had rules for things like an astral quest as part of a magician's initiation, but trying to imagine how you would do Shadowrun adventures into the metaplanes and how you might interact with them or possibly bring anyone else except for the mage, it really has been absent. Even in 5th edition, we had a book called Etherology, which was an ebook that covered the metaplanes, but it was still like super vague. It was a fun read, very much in character, but it's just not really that much to work with for bringing it to life in your own campaigns. So that is what this book is, Astral Ways. It brings the metaplanes to life in great detail with lots of different options for doing adventures there. Ways to get there both astrally but also physically, so mundanes can go on the trip. There'll be things there for deckers and technomancers and riggers to do, so they won't be completely out of their elements. Lots of adventure hooks, plenty of reasons to go shadowrunning other than the standard classic Astral Quest, though that is covered as well. And a bunch of new toys and things, some new spells, new spirits to summon that make the spirit affinity quality even more useful, and some new scary threats. So I'll just sort of go with a chapter by chapter overview here. The first chapter, So You Want to Visit a Metaplane, is one of the ones that I got to write for this. It's an in-character travel guide for visiting the metaplanes from the perspective of a character named Wayfinder, who is an astral explorer and metaplanar conservationist. This goes into several reasons why you might go into the metaplanes, for initiation and magical knowledge of the classic ones, to make deals with spirits, to deal with spirits permanently if you've got a free spirit that's causing you trouble and won't go away, to acquire resources, explore, and go on Shadowruns. There's lots of different reasons why you might be hired to go into the metaplanes now. It introduces an idea called metaplanar translation, which was actually first brought up in the Court of Shadows book, which was a 5th edition book on the plane of Fairy, where when you went there, you didn't just stay how you normally were. You would sort of your forms would translate to fit the location. So your outfits would change to more of like a Ren Fair vibe. Your guns would turn into crossbows. Your drones would turn into critters. We've sort of taken this idea and expanded it to the other metaplanes. So some metaplanes, you might just show up and be as you are, and none of your stuff changes. But other ones will actually translate you so you look differently. So on the elemental planes, for example, on the plane of Earth, you would look like a gnome style, the Earth elemental type of gnome, not the diminutive metatype. On the plane of air, you would have more of a sylph-like appearance and such. And your gear can translate as well. Though the big thing is you don't really have super new rules for changing it. Like if your gun like looks like a crossbow on the plane of fairy, it's still going to have the same stats for shooting with it. You'll still be able to use your same skill. So it's not like, oh no, now I have to use a crossbow skill, or now I have to use different stats, or totally convert my character over. So that's not what this is. It's more of mostly a visual translation. However, one of the things that's kind of neat with this new book is that it brings up the idea that technology exists on the metaplanes. So the spirit of kin, which would have been previously known as the spirit of man, that is sort of the metaplane that most sort of matches and is influenced by metahumanity. So there, you're going to have the most recognizable representations of technology. You might even have places where there are things like cars and trains, and even an actual similar thing to the Matrix that might exist there. But other weirder places have native technology. So there's rules for hacking devices and objects and things on the metaplanes. There's rules for vehicles and how those might be represented there. And then, of course, the way your weapons work. At the end of this chapter, we have introduced a new contact type, which is Free Spirit. You can't get as high loyalty with them as a starting character. They max out at loyalty level 4 because they're free spirits and they don't trust metahumans so much. But if you want someone who can act as a guide on the metaplanes, or someone who can maybe open a metaplanar gateway for you, this would be a really good contact to have. Next chapter, not one that I wrote, is about the elemental planes. It's just a fantastic chapter covering the planes of earth, air, fire, and water. Each one is presented in greater detail than we've ever seen before in Shadowrun. There are cities, specific locations to travel and encounter, intrigue to get involved with, local metaplanar politics. And it's also worth mentioning that each elemental plane has multiple cardinal poles where they're nearest to another elemental plane. So there might be a pole where the plane of water and air are closest together. So you might have interesting hyper metaplanes or sub metaplanes that exist between them. When you translate to these elemental planes, as I mentioned before, you might have an appearance more like a local elemental. And it's worth noting that hacking technology works there. There is no actual matrix. Say on the plane of air, you can wirelessly hack things. The plane of Earth has induction technology, so all you need to do is touch something and you can interface with it. And you may have to come up with more creative ways to set up direct connections to things on the planes of fire and water to hack those. Technomancers here on the elemental planes gain some unique abilities. There's no resonance, but they sort of fundamentally connect with the living things that are there. So they gain something like animal empathy for the less sapient spirits, the more animal type ones. They also gain danger sense and a special ability to detect the presence of spirits, which might come in handy. One of the big reasons you might travel to the elemental planes, and also one of the big things that's attracting the mega corporations to come there and exploit and strip mine, are true elements. So you may have true air, true earth, true fire, true water. These are very powerful reagents that when you actually use them involved in creating foci, can grant some powerful additional effects. One example is Elemental Mastery, which gives you bonus dice for conjuring and dealing with spirits that match the elemental type of true element that was used in making the focus, but also bonus dice for using like magic spells that relate to that. So you might have, if you had true fire involved in making your combat spell focus, that would certainly help you with your Firebolt spell. Some other examples: a familiar. So your focus can be the focus point of a clairaudience or clairvoyance spell that you don't have to cast. So you can just see see and hear what's going on near your focus. The one of the earth options is protective, where it can stabilize you if you start dying. A couple of them have the option of being disruptive, where they can create a low mana ebb on command. And a couple of them have the dangerous option too, where if someone else touches your focus, they might take damage. So pretty interesting, and I could definitely see people wanting to track down these elements, either to make their foci more special or to make lots of new yen, because they're quite valuable. Some other unique foci here is the Firewire focus. It's a focus that allows a character to control vehicles and jump into vehicles on the metaplanes using their control rig. And it even allows a character to summon sort of a metaplanar vehicle that they can use on the metaplanes. I'm a little bit unclear on whether or not you have to be magically active to have this focus, or if it's meant for riggers who are even mundane riggers could bond them, because traditionally only awakened characters can bond foci. But I'm curious. I'm curious whether this is meant for mundane riggers to be able to use, or if it's only for awakened riggers, which are relatively uncommon because of the essence loss involved in getting a control rig. Memory of Water is another unusual option in the plane of water. The cyber deck translates into this sort of icy artifact, and you can use it to attempt to view events and access memories of the past from the plane of water. There's a risk of memory loss, which might become permanent in the case of a glitch when you attempt this, but this might be an interesting divination option, or even the purpose of a Shadowrun to go to the plane of water to learn something hidden about the past that is otherwise unknowable. And as I mentioned before, there's new spirit types. There are tons of new spirit types in this chapter. Lots of very specific, interesting, different types of elementals, basically. And if you have the spirit affinity quality, you can actually summon these specific elementals. So that's a lot of fun. Moving on to, there's a chapter about the Dis, which really, for the first time, solidly introduces the Dis. They've been hinted at, but never presented in detail before. The Dis are a new big bad metaplanar threat for Shadowrun. They're strange energy entities that exist. They have their own metaplane, and they go about draining mana from other metaplanes. And apparently, Earth is very tasty to them. They've made deals with mega corporations to give them access to some fancy new Dissian technology or magical abilities and Faustian deals. So we've got metaplanes that are sort of moving into, or rather, we've got mega corporations that are moving into the metaplanes to strip mine them for resources, upsetting the delicate balances there. But then we also have the Dis who want to do the same to our world, that some of the mega corporations are in league with them now and helping them do that. So yeah, this is going to be a pretty big plot point coming up in some future Shadowrun books. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, now we've got some solid intel on the Dis. And if you're curious about the disappearance of Third Core, definitely relates to this. So check that out. We also have a write-up on the Hive, which is the plane of insect spirits, which apparently there are megacorp expeditions going there. Well, you know, Ares in particular is doing that. There's lots of really great shadow talk in this chapter. Gives some reasons and objectives for why some potentially suicidal Shadowrunners might be hired to go there, or maybe forced to go there to go get something. I can't imagine too many runners would be actually willing to step into the bug plane to go do a job. But yeah, now there's rules for it and lots of details other than just like a little chapter about this is where the bugs are, stay away. The Plane of Battle has its own chapter as well, which was sort of previously mentioned and brought up in other editions as one of the destinations you might travel to as part of an astral quest. It's a place where lots of battles happen. There's Colosseum bouts, larger scale mass battles. Essentially, it's an interesting place to travel if you like fighting stuff. There's a rule in here called cadence, which is interesting. So the more rounds that you engage in fighting, you don't really get tired, but you actually build up momentum, and you can then sort of build up your ability to interact with and fight alongside your allies. Moving on to the Citadel. The Citadel is definitely a place that relates to astral quests. It's been sort of the central point of an astral quest in the past, where you go to find out what you're trying to find out or unlock your ordeal for initiation. Here, there's also it could be a place where you might travel to now to go try to get something specific or find something unusual, or just look for whatever pay data you can acquire that's something of value. So there are many vaults in the Citadel that are guarded by various different entities or things, and there's also these things called golems, a number of different type of entities that sort of guard the Citadel. And you might want to hunt some of those, and there's sort of reasons for hunting them down or valuables you can get from them. So lots of details on the Citadel. As for my part in this book, I wrote the first chapter, which was sort of an in-character guide to traveling the metaplanes, but I also wrote up some interesting hyper metaplanes. These are all inspired from and sort of foreshadowed by the book Etherology that came out for 5th edition a while back. But they were just sort of mentions with like a couple of sentences or maybe a small paragraph that I thought, that sounds like it could be an interesting or fun place to visit, to set some adventures in. So I wrote up a few chapters on some hypermeta planes. First up will be the Place of Clouds. This is a hyperplane that is above the plane of water, below the plane of air, sort of at that cardinal pole. It's a place where, sort of up in the air, if you've ever been on a flight on a cloudy day and sort of looked down and saw the clouds below in the sky above, that's sort of the general appearance. However, there's also a bunch of different cloud islands, each with different biomes on them, different environments. These cloud islands, they're sort of thick and gauzy, and they can support matter. At the center of the Place of Clouds, there's a floating city called the Spire, where there are separate districts that represent each of the other metaplanes, and there are now offices there for different corporations. Among the spirits, this is sort of seen as a resort of sorts, a vacation travel destination, a very pleasant place to go and relax. But it's also very rich in true air and pure reagents. And so the megacorps are there engaged in strip mining activities. Spirits that can fly, like air spirits in particular, get around just fine here. But non-flying spirits and other denizens get around using airships. So we've got lots of different airships, some of which are sort of big floating rock type things. Some of them might look like sailing ships, but they fly. The native wood here, when it is on the Place of Clouds, so if you harvest it from one of the islands, it actually has a natural quality to float, so you can build flying ships out of that. Or you might have like skis that you can put on that allow you to sort of ski across the air. So I just think airships are fun, and I wanted an excuse to include them. And of course, if you got airships, you got to have airship pirates. So one of the bigger islands on here is a pirate island, where there are sort of pirates that go out and raid other airships and things for resources and come back. And it's sort of the Vegas of the Place of Clouds. So it's sort of a Vegas type location for spirits to visit. And Spinrad has a large presence there. Dissing ships have been seen here as well, and they've harvested and dissolved a few islands. So we're seeing their influence in the other metaplanes as well as on Earth. And I'll mention there are rules here for airships, and There's like an edge rule for boarding, and just should be a fun chapter for exploring and adventure. And I've got some rules in here for harvesting regions that are generally faster and more favorable than you would normally find, but with the potential of encountering, um, well, something dangerous. The next chapter in here that I wrote is the Land of the Dino Beasts. So, yeah, I thought a metaplanar adventure brings us some interesting ideas and possibilities. Um, there is the island of Pandora, which is mentioned in Etherology, and it's mentioned that there were dinosaur beast spirits there. And I thought, well, this deserves a chapter, and Jason Hardy apparently agreed with me. And then I pulled some further shenanigans. But I'll just mention, first of all, the plane of beasts, at least on the island of Pandora, native spirits that are slain there do not dissipate, but instead leave behind a corpse that can be eaten, harvested for food, leather, bones, and reagents. And again, on Pandora, there are dinosaur spirits. So beast spirits that resemble dinosaurs. You have T-Rexes and sauropods and velociraptors and oversized piranhas and all sorts of fun and nasty things. However, one of my additions to this and is something called I've called Tandorans, which are they're actually a species that are originally from Earth. But they've been living here for a long time, like thousands of years, since the last cycle of magic. They're Tandorans, which are saurian amphibious humanoids. And oddly enough, they speak Japanese now, too. There's a bit of a story behind that. But ultimately, if you're familiar with Earth Dawn and my love of Earth Dawn, this is me bringing the Tiskraying into Shadowrun. So I can't say that in the book that's published because there's Catalyst doesn't have the rights to Tiskraying, which are owned by FASA. And so they're called Tandorans because they're from the island of Tandora. But yes, these are definitely Tiskraying. So they were rescued from Earth by a dragon they know as the Great Mother, basically before the last cycle of magic fell. And she raised and protected them for 10 generations before leaving, telling them that someday she would return, and when it was safe for them to return to Earth, they would return back to Earth. But that was thousands of years ago now. And they've been living on this island where the dinosaur spirits generally accept them as being there, and they're sort of safe here. But in the 1980s, a Japanese woman named Miko mysteriously found herself on the island of Tandora. So this is before the awakening, just some sort of weird magic phenomena. And she encountered the Tandorans there, and they learned her language. She learned theirs, and they learned about Earth, something that they hadn't known about except through the Great Mother's stories long ago. And so she had a profound influence on their culture. So these Tiskraying have a sort of a Japanese influence on their culture. At this time, many of them thought it would be time to return to Earth soon. But there was also apparently a lot of the Tandorans who didn't want to return to Earth. They were happy with their life here. And ultimately, Miko was assassinated, and a war broke out among the Tandorans. And now there's a few different factions there. The war is over. They generally kind of get along, but mostly by staying away from each other. The regions in here, there's essentially a large island with a volcano at the island center, and there's sort of different separate regions that are kind of their own different biomes or environments. There's a great lake near the volcano at the island center, where there's this sort of floating city called Tandora City, which is the largest city of the Tandorans here. Near there, on the other side of the volcano, there's a lava lake that some believe the depths of it connect to the plane of fire somewhere, but good luck surviving swimming through that. There's a great forest, and there's a Tandoran city or village called Arbora, which is both up in the trees, but also underwater in a large river that passes through. There's a great desert, which is largely uninhabited. The Tandorans sometimes travel in there to explore the mysterious ancient temples that predate their arrival on the island of Tandora. But otherwise, there's not much that lives there. Near the Great Desert is the Great Savannah, and here there is a sort of this large roving nomadic village of Tandorans that they call the camp, and they sort of migrate along with the migrations of the sauropods, like Brontosaurus type big dinosaur spirits, and live in harmony with them. And the faction that is mostly resistant to returning to Earth is known as the Kyoko faction, named after Kyoko, their leader. When the Tandorans come of age, they receive sort of their official name, which is traditionally now a Japanese-sounding name. So there's lots of these dinosaur people with Japanese names. They're out in the Great Jungle. They're hunters, and there's sort of an interesting, somewhat more warlike and potentially more hostile group of Tandorans. So yeah, I thought it would be fun to introduce them. Some of the new rules in here is there's stats for the Tandorans, stats for the dinosaur spirits, and if you have the evocation or invocation meta magic, and if you have spirit affinity with beast spirits, you can actually greater summon dinosaur spirits to Earth. So that's a new option for people if you want to summon a T-Rex. Well, they're pretty high force and they're pretty dangerous. So good luck with that. But it's possibly a thing you could do. There's a couple of new foci in here that I introduced that are developed by Tandorans. There's a sauropod heart amulet, which prevents glitches, and a raptor skull helmet that provides concealment. And lastly, there are stats for Tandorans, both NPCs that you might encounter here, but I also included rules for if you wanted to make a Tandoran player character. So you can make a Tandoran that is actually from the island of Tandora, that has actually traveled to the plane where Earth is, or perhaps there are some that have just naturally occurred on Earth who have no connection to the island of Tandora, and if you want to make one like that, there's rules for that. So I thought that'd be fun. And I had a lot of fun with these chapters, making ones that would be just interesting, fun adventures, but including some ideas that I thought would be fun to include, like putting Tiskrang in Shadowrun, right? Honestly, I have almost find it difficult to believe still that Jason Hardy allowed me to get away with that. So thanks, Jason. The last plane that I wrote up is the Wastes of Migon, which is a hyperplane connected to the plane of Kin, most notably near the region of Id, which is sort of the dark, nasty, evil, dark side of metahumanity's place. And this is a plane that is sort of built from the ideas of nuclear devastation, basically Fallout world. So the way to get there is through the city of Hubris, which is essentially a bombed out city where there are shadows of people on the wall that you might think are remnants of a nuclear explosion, but they're actually also dangerous entities that you really shouldn't go close to. There's sort of those vast wastes of a wilderness. Some of the other regions is there's a glass desert. There's an ancient power plant that the signs up there are in Russian, so it's sort of memories or ideas of like places like Chernobyl. Here there are also some, most of the spirits and things you'll encounter here are toxic. So this is a toxic radiation plane. So if you're a toxic mage, this place might be a fun place to go to gather your power and such. But if you're not, it's not so pleasant to you. So one of the unique characteristics of this is the more time you spend there, the more likelihood of gaining mutations. And these are not fancy superpower mutations. They're very unpleasant mutations. The more that time you spend there, the more mutations you get, and they stay with you until you leave the plane. And if you come back to the plane, all the mutations you had previously show up again, and you might get more. So that's sort of a nasty feature of the place. But I sort of put this together as sort of like a kind of a heavy metal adventuring kind of place, or it's almost like an OSR type feel for exploration and encountering stuff. Not all the spirits here are toxic. For one, there are a couple of sort of human-like factions, the Yagil and the Yasmal. And this isn't a place that I made up. There are references to it from Etherology, but I brought it to life with more detail for this book. The Yagil and the Yasmal will trade with you. If you have a neutral or positive spirit reputation, they'll trade with you fairly. There are also Gnars, which are sort of dwarf HMHVV infected dwarves that have to eat metahuman bones, but they're not necessarily hostile. They much prefer to trade, ideally for bones, but also for other things, rather than attack people and eat them. Though if you're rude to them or attack them, they might just attack you and gnaw on your bones. Some of the sights to see here. Well, there's a sort of large city called Hubris, which you might explore for things. There's also basically a train that travels all around this plane, and it's called the Death Train. There's a bunch of different stopping points or stations you can get on and off, and there are spirits there, toxic kin spirits, who are the conductors, and they are very polite and friendly to you and accommodating, and they let you ride their train. But also, the cost of riding the death train is that the conductors will attempt to kill you once during your trip on the train. Always at least one attempt on your life. So yeah, if you can survive and deal with the conductors, who are otherwise unfailingly polite and helpful, though you should not accept any food or drink from them, or refreshments, I should say, because it might be poisoned. It's a really fast way to get around, which might save you from building up mutations by traveling around the wilderness. Another reason why you might not want to travel around the wilderness is that there's a gang of sorts, sort of a large group called the Crimson Carnage, and they're essentially a vampire and ghoul biker gang that rides the wastes and ambushes people and takes them for food or whatever purpose. Their leader is King Crimson, who is a really powerful Nosferatu. I've got stats for him in the book if you actually want to try going up against him. But again, they also ride out these motorbikes that have spikes on them, and they also have this ability to grant the rider the binding power, usually by launching webbing or nets or things so they can capture people alive and drag them back so they can be eaten. And each group is basically mostly ghouls, but they're usually led by a vampire. So that's fun. Also worth mentioning are the critters that are here are toxic mutant enemy. They I've got some rules for rolling them up randomly or just taking some critters and modifying them with powers. So you might have things like the glow rats, which are devil rats that can project a radioactive elemental fire attack. But then also just like the monstrosities, which is sort of a rolling mass of tumors and teeth and tentacles and things that you really want to stay away from. One of the things you might come to this plane for is to hunt the Kruba, which are sort of a variation of sort of a toxic radioactive fire spirits. But if you defeat them, their hearts are very valuable and they're actually pure. They're not toxic. They can be used to gain true fire, or actually while you're here, you can toss them and they kind of act like hand grenades because they explode when you drop them or bang them up. So one of the things I did with this chapter to have fun with it was include some encounter tables. So if you just want to like go here and travel around and roll up some encounters, I've got some of that information in there and some loot salvage tables. So I sort of just really leaned to the sort of heavy metal slash, Fallout world survival horror OSR kind of feel for this. So um, it's generally not a place that you would go just for fun, but for going there on a Shadowrun, it should make for some fun adventures. The last main chapter of the book is called Techniques of Travel, and this is the crunchiest chapter of the book. So this is where you're going to find rules for astral quests, nice section of game definitions for the various metaplanar phenomena and constructs and things. Some of the highlights is there's a drug called Shade, which forces, or you could say allow, depending on the willingness of the person who's ingesting it. It forces a person to astrally project for a time, even if you're mundane. So it allows someone who's mundane to experience astral space. There's rules for traveling physically to the astral plane, not just as an astral projection, or to the metaplanes, I mean. There's rules for different ways of getting there, gateways, portals, and rifts. Rituals now for you could actually learn a ritual to open a metaplanar gate temporarily. There's a spell called metaplanar stasis. So if you don't want to experience translation into the metaplanes, you can prevent that and stay how you normally would be. You'll also find rules for hacking and how that works in the metaplanes, rules for things like the encounter suits that Ares developed for traveling into the hive, and there's just sort of lots of details about aspects of the metaplanes. So each different metaplane in this book, we've got a little section that sort of details its technology level, its magic level, the environment, the terrain that you'll find there, what kind of population is there, the type of society, and also distance, which is like the distance from essentially our astral plane. So the farther you get from Earth, so to speak, in the metaplanes, the weirder and stranger and more alien the metaplanes are. And also the longer it might take for you to get there, especially if you're traveling through the astral sea to do that. So this is where you'll find details on all of those and what all of that means, descriptions of them, but also a random metaplane generator. So there's potentially an innumerable number of different metaplanes or hyper metaplanes that you could travel to. And as a GM, if you just want to come up with something weird for your players to end up on, you could actually roll up some of these randomly, and there's some tables for that. So overall, lots of detail in this book, lots of crunch, and I really love it that the metaplanes are getting this sort of, I guess, concrete treatment, sort of details for players and game masters to read and bring to their table without being too vague about. A lot of times in previous editions, sort of the details about the metaplanes have been kind of tiptoed around, leaving them to be mysterious, which I can understand wanting to do that because they're weird magic other places. But it also made it difficult to imagine, well, what do we do with this with our Shadowrun adventures? Now we've got a book for that. So if you're at all interested in checking out the metaplanes, I would definitely recommend picking up this book. If not, I mean, it's still just a fun read. There's lots of great shadow talk, lots of in-character stories and discussion and description. It really builds out and expands the lore of Shadowrun in some fun ways. So yeah, I'd recommend checking out Astral Ways. You can get the PDF now. I'm not sure when the physical book's going to be available, but we'll probably be showing up in stores soon. And I think that's all I wanted to say about it for today. So I think we'll move on to Q&A here if anyone has any questions. I didn't see any on the Patreon Discord, and I don't see any showing up in chat. It's been a little bit quiet today, but that's okay. It was a day after St. Patrick's Day. You've all been going out and partying, and now you're resting up or whatever. So it's okay to have a quiet day. But I'll give a couple of minutes here if anyone in chat has a question they want to toss in. Actually, I'm not just going to sit here. I think that would be boring. I think we'll just call it. It's been we've had some really much longer episodes recently with the interviews of Subversion and Vault and some other things. So yeah, I think it's okay to have a shorter episode, and so I think we'll wrap things up. With that, I just wanted to mention you can support the Arcology podcast on Patreon. At the $2 level, you have access to exclusive actual play series available as direct download or through private podcast feeds. There's the Lone Star campaign, a Pirates campaign, a Black Star Neo-Anarchist campaign, and a Las Vegas campaign, which are ghouls in Las Vegas using Shadowrun Anarchy rules in that case. You also get access to the patrons-only Discord server. And at the $5 level, you can sit in on our actual play recording sessions, which is a lot of fun. But I think we'll wrap that up. With that, you've been listening to the Arcology podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.